Dwayne Johnson's latest blockbuster is finally in theaters, and guess what? It sank like a rock. Ba-boom. So, what went wrong with Red 1? For decades, movies have asked a single, solemn question: what if Santa Claus was real?
Tomorrow morning, 10 a.m., Santa's coming to town.
Santa! Oh my God!
But none of those movies handled that question in quite the same way as 2024's holiday-themed action-adventure romp Red 1. The film sees Santa kidnapped after the North Pole's location is revealed by a hacker named Jack O'Malley. Enter Callum Drift, head of Santa's security force, who springs into action to rescue his boss and save Christmas. And if this all sounds a bit like the plot of that over-the-top Christmas action movie from the beginning of Scrooge, that's because it basically is.
It's Lee Majors, the $6 million band.
Red 1 takes viewers on a wild ride that also involves an anthropomorphic polar bear, a monstrous snowman army, and other holiday-based figures of Eastern folklore, such as Krampus and Grilla. Amazon MGM bet big on Red 1, as did Dwayne Johnson, who not only starred in the movie but also produced it. It certainly had to do well to recoup a reported $250 million production budget, not including marketing costs. Sadly, Red 1's opening weekend fell well short of expectations. The movie made just $32 million in the US and $51 million internationally. It's easy to see past holiday hits as proof that Christmas movies automatically equal box office gold. Truth is, though, it's been close to 20 years since the last time a new, entirely original Christmas movie released to theaters really scored big at the box office. Over the last couple of decades, most holiday films have entered the realm of made-for-TV movies and streaming originals. One notable outlier was 2018's The Grinch, which is actually the current record holder for highest-grossing Christmas movie of all time worldwide. But it also happens to be based on one of the most iconic Christmas characters in history, and taking an original story to those heights is no easy task. Indeed, the last truly successful and truly original Christmas movie was Elf in 2003, and even that movie's global take of $229 million would have been considered a flop for a movie as expensive as Red 1. For a few years, almost anything that was released to theaters that was even remotely superhero adjacent had a decent chance of being a modest box office hit, at the very least.
I can do this all day.
Yeah, I know.
But that bubble was bound to burst eventually, and people soon began to whisper of the much-feared phenomenon known as superhero fatigue. In 2023, even the Marvel Cinematic Universe started to feel the effects of audience burnout when the Marvels became the first true MCU flop. And 2024 hasn't been much better. Sure, Deadpool and Wolverine clawed out a huge theatrical run, but this year also saw Joker Folie à Deux fall $200 million short of even breaking even, as well as whatever the heck happened with Madame Web.
And when you take on the responsibility, great power will come.
It was clearly a misguided marketing decision to try to sell Red 1 as some sort of holiday-themed superhero movie while leaning heavily into the fact that the two leads are superhero movie alumni. Not only does this misrepresent the movie's actual story, but it seems to have really scuppered its box office chances. Audiences just aren't particularly hungry for superhero movies right now, and this sure looks like one. While Red 1 didn't have much in the way of opening weekend competition at the box office, there was one major small-screen event that likely kept a lot of people at home. Netflix's long-awaited live boxing match between Mike Tyson and Jake Paul finally took place on November 15th, after having previously been postponed due to Tyson's health issues. At its peak, Paul vs. Tyson had 65 million people concurrently tuned into the broadcast. That's a significant number of people who weren't at the movies on Friday night to see Red 1. While Netflix may or may not have known that the fight would have ended up competing with Amazon's theatrical effort, it's quite clear who came out on top. The fact that Red 1 saw a 24% increase in sales between Friday and Saturday only seems to further reinforce the effect that Paul vs. Tyson had on the movie's box office performance. There can be no doubt that Red 1 was an expensive movie, being chock full of action set pieces, computer-animated effects and characters, elaborate sets, and several big-name actors. But does it truly look like a movie that cost over $200 million to make? Not necessarily, and there's a reason for that too. If reports are to be believed, Dwayne Johnson alone is responsible for adding at least $80 million to Red 1's budget.
Is that funny to you?
Hey, what are we doing here?
For starters, Dwayne Johnson got a record-breaking payday with his $30 million upfront salary. That's on top of another $20 million in various back-end agreements, although if these are tied to box office benchmarks, it's not likely that he'll get the full amount. Even so, that's a sizable amount of cash spent on his involvement. And then there are the allegations that Johnson was frequently late to set, sometimes by as much as 8 hours, to say nothing of the days he never showed up. The resulting delays were said to have cost the production another $50 million. Still, it should be noted that Red One producer Hiram Garcia has denied those reports. Here's a question. Why was this movie released in theaters at all, rather than debuting on Amazon's Prime Video streaming service? Streamers typically limit their theatrical releases to prestige films that might be eligible for Academy Award consideration. No offense to Red One, but it's not exactly Oscar bait. In fact, Red One was originally greenlit under the auspices of it being a streaming movie, and for most people who watched the trailer, it looked exactly like that. A decent enough movie to watch with a family because it's coming to a streaming service, but not quite worth paying movie ticket premiums to see. As it turns out, everything changed for Red One when Dwayne Johnson saw an IMAX screening of Oppenheimer and quickly decided that his movie also deserved a huge screen treatment.
This thing, Red One on this screen, with this technology, it's gonna be game over.
So even though Red One was already halfway through production as a lower-budgeted streaming movie, it had to suddenly switch gears to a theatrical release. And sure, we could applaud that ambition, but it's not like any of this showed through in the movie's trailers. Worse still, with the Amazon name attached to the movie, it's almost certain that many potential audience members will have decided to simply wait until it made its inevitable streaming debut. On paper, it would seem like Red One has two pretty impressive headliners in Dwayne Johnson and Chris Evans, but when you dig a little deeper, you'll realize that neither of them have exactly been safe bets on the big screen as of late. Evans has only one big box office hit under his belt in his post-MCU days, and that's 2019's Knives Out, in which he was just one part of an ensemble absolutely stacked with big names. Beyond that, he's mostly been circling streaming projects, with the exception of playing Buzz's voice in 2022's Pixar flop Lightyear. As far as box office tallies go, Evans' recent hauls have been fairly underwhelming. The same goes for Johnson, whose supposed bankability took a huge hit with the disappointing 1-2 punch of Jungle Cruise and Black Adam, the latter of which he really put himself out there to champion.
The hierarchy of power in the DC universe is about to change.
DC League of Super Pets, which starred Johnson in several roles, did fairly well, but was still considered to have grossed below expectations. The only Dwayne Johnson movies to have done well at the box office in recent memory have been sequels or adaptations, and it's been quite some time since the actor has been able to headline a brand new IP to great theatrical success. Critics and audiences don't always see eye to eye. Plenty of movies are loved by critics, but reviled by audiences, or vice versa. Certainly, bad reviews don't always mean the kiss of death for a movie's box office chances, but when it's the type of movie people might have been on the fence about, as was likely the case with Red One, bad reviews can spell disaster. As the first batch of critic reviews for Red One began to hit Rotten Tomatoes, it became clear that most critics weren't going to be fans of the film. The RT score started out in the 30s and has stayed there since, currently sitting at 33% across over 100 reviews. The consensus reads, wrapped in slick packaging but wholly lacking in holiday magic, Red One is a ho-ho-hum action-adventure. Multiple critics noted the movie's palpable lack of magic, and many lambasted both the quality and the amount of CGI. Looper's own review called the movie a tepid action comedy saved by Christmas cheer, on the way to a 5.5 out of 10 rating.
That was so disturbing.
Now, it's worth pointing out that the popcorn meter, as Rotten Tomatoes calls its cumulative audience score, rates Red One at an impressive 90%. So it seems that those audiences who did see the movie tended to like it. Whether that translates to a word-of-mouth box office boost over the coming weeks is hard to say. Given the impending competition, though, it doesn't look likely. Just because a movie suffers a poor opening weekend doesn't mean it's doomed at the box office, and a number of releases in recent years have seen sales improve as time went on. That, plus the fact that both holiday movies and family movies have the potential for extended stays in the theater, means that we might want to hold off on writing the obituary for Red One's box office run. When you consider what Red One has to face between now and the end of November in terms of box office competition, however, it seems probable that the movie has already seen its best weekend, which would mean that it's all downhill from here. The weekend of November 25th 22nd sees a US release of both Gladiator 2 and Wicked, which are projected to see domestic opening weekend tallies of at least $80 million and $100 million, respectively. Given that Red One only managed $32 million domestically in its own opening weekend, with only the weeks-old Venom: The Last Dance as a serious competitor, things definitely don't look good. And there's another movie on the horizon too. On November 27th, Disney will release Moana 2 into theaters, meaning that Dwayne Johnson will be directly competing against himself for pretty much the exact same audience he was courting with Red One.
Can I get a chee-hoo?
Given the choice between two family-friendly Dwayne Johnson fantasy adventures to see at the theater that weekend, it's hard to imagine too many families choosing Red One over Moana 2. There's one final problem that may have caused Red One trouble at the box office, and it all comes down to a matter of branding. When it was first revealed that Dwayne Johnson was making an action movie called Red One, many immediately wondered if it was a sequel to his 2021 Netflix film Red Notice. It wasn't just the similar titles that had people confused either. Both movies are distributed by a streaming company, both star Johnson, and both have him appear alongside prominent actors from comic book films. That's not to say that anyone will be mistaking Chris Evans for Ryan Reynolds, but this is the type of thing that's easy to confuse when you're taking a cursory glance at each project. Considering Red Notice did strong numbers for Netflix, you might assume that this mistaken connection to that movie could only be a good thing for Red One. But there are a few things to consider here. First, it would take a pretty remarkable streaming original movie to convince people to pay for a full-price ticket to the sequel. Second, just because someone liked Red Notice doesn't mean they'll be interested in seeing a holiday-themed, more family-focused follow-up. And sure, Red Notice has a very strong 92% popcorn meter rating, but that doesn't mean that everyone who saw it actually liked it enough to care about the sequel, or the movie they thought was the sequel.